The smell of burning rubber from that screeching U-turn the other night has now disseminated.
And it is choking everybody around the bars and coffee bars here, Nick. And because it's not just that. The real question is this the beginning of the great unravelling of much more? And on almost every area that you look at, whether it's benefit cuts that you were talking with the Prime Minister about, or whether it's environmental changes, or whether it's planning, or whether it's fracking, you are seeing the beginnings of U-turns. And the reason is that she has got her big agenda. She's got her big growth agenda. What she doesn't have, it appears, is a parliamentary majority for it.
It's beginning to unravel. Do you get a sort of stench around the party, around the conference, as you pick up with presumably people you've known for 20, 30 years?
Oh, absolutely. And people are sharing WhatsApp messages from other members of the party and so on. I can't really repeat on morning wireless what people are saying without breaking into fluent Anglo-Saxon, which I'm not going to do. But I remember the omni-shambles budget of 2012. That was a word that came into the lexicon, I think, from the thick of it. And people started talking about an omni-shambles. This is a kind of omni-shambles in multiple different directions. It's absolutely extraordinary. I have never seen a conference dissolve quite like this one.
It's a fatal tailspin then, is it?
I think it feels fatal. Certainly phrases like the stench of death and death spiral and death zoom are being talked about again and again and again by level-headed people. And don't forget, the real opponents of Liz Truss in the Conservative Party aren't even here. They've stayed away.
Of course, if growth comes about, then the Prime Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng, would say, we told you all along. Can we just write that off? Certainly, you have to work hard to find an economist who supports their position.
It is still just possible that, in 6 months' time, they're still there and the economy is starting to show signs of life and growing. We've all got short memories in politics, and people may look back at this and think, yeah, Birmingham was pretty rough, but it's in the past. I don't think that's the case, for lots of very, very concrete reasons. Kwasi Kwarteng talked about a little turbulence, cue laughter in the hall about his mini budget. Somebody was tweeting today that little turbulence is going to cost lots of ordinary families, average families, £1,500 extra on their mortgages in the year ahead. They're not going to forget that.
Reflect on this. Somebody quite senior told me, we're starting to see the value of Boris, don't laugh, we're starting to see the value of Boris Johnson because he did actually balance the two sides of the party. He was an astonishing frontman, and all the offstage feuding and fighting could sort of be forgotten because you would go, here comes big bluff Boris.
Indeed.
Is there some truth?
There is actually some truth in that. I would go a bit further. I would say that a lot of what we're seeing today is the outcome not of Brexit itself, but of the fact that the Conservative Party couldn't work out quite what Brexit was for, what it meant. For most people, it meant, as it were, a kind of reassertion of sovereignty, going a bit back to the old days, things as they were, a little bit nostalgic. I think most Tory MPs took that kind of view, but there was always a small group for whom it was a radical excuse to veer off in a totally different direction. This was, in the Californian phrase, move fast and break things Brexit. It was, turn Britain into a much more Americanized, all the markets roaring ahead, unfamiliar, fast-moving kind of country, so-called Singapore-on-Thames. They were always a small minority, and now they're in charge of the party.
Quite recent history, and I have to say I wasn't working in the country at the time I was overseas, but is this akin to John Major, the dying days of the Major administration?
I'm tempted to say that John Major and the cabinet around John Major were more substantial. John Major had been a very successful rising minister for a long time in office. He was well known in the country, and he was a calming influence. He was facing a particularly ferocious backbench rebellion over the Maastricht Treaty and all of that. Black Wednesday, and more where I think there is a really interesting parallel is in the so-called equity problem, the equity gap, where we had negative equity, if you remember. Lots of people's houses were suddenly worth less than their mortgages. And I can see something ahead a little bit like that when it comes to the rising cost of mortgages right now. But, Major carried on for quite a long time, and he always did better in elections than people expected.
Finally, as they depart Birmingham, what does the Prime Minister, possibly more what to her what's called comms team, her communications team, her advisors, what do they need to learn from how the mini budget was handled, how the U-turn was handled, how Birmingham has been handled? Andrew?
They need to learn something called politics. They need to think ahead. They need to prepare the ground. What they need to do now is buy themselves time, because this could be the end of Liz Truss quite quickly if she doesn't really get a grip on this.
That you think they'd do her in prior to the election?
they're talking about it. I mean, all around this place, people are talking about it. Is there some way of avoiding a full leadership contest, just going in? There was an old phrase they used to hear back in the Macmillan era. The party has been taking soundings. And somebody said to me, taking soundings is coming back. We can go in and say to, I'm terribly sorry, opponents, we've been taking soundings and you don't have the support of the party. And it appears that Sir Herbert Oatcake is the universal choice of the party. And Sir Herbert Oatcake becomes party leader. It does seem mad, and it is mad. But nonetheless, so great is the unhappiness that is the kind of conversation crackling around. You were talking about the laughter behind you. I think it's hollow laughter. It's hollow laughter at gallows humour is what's going all around us.
What are you examining tonight? What aspects are you looking at tonight, Andrew? Have you worked it out yet?
I want to look at the question of the real problem here being possibly the apparent idiocy, really, of imposing a Prime Minister by the party members on the parliamentary party who don't support her. In other words, her problem is in the parliamentary party. And as we all return to Westminster next week, it's going to get worse, not better. And it's because she doesn't have enough MPs behind her. And it is slightly bonkers for party members to impose on MPs somebody they didn't really want.